Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are back for day number 7 of the MSI main stage here. Very excited to get into today's series. We were hyping it up in the video 2 days ago when we were talking about the end of the upper bracket round number 2 when we learned what the matchup would be going into today. This was the matchup that I think we were all the most excited about seeing in round number 2 or lower bracket round 2, this whole next couple series kind of thing. I think this is the one that everyone was looking at as a potential turning point for the tournament, and I was really excited about it as well, so I'm very excited to get to talk about it here today as the first series after the weekend. If you guys are excited, let me know down in the comments section below. What did you think was going to happen in this series, and did it go according to plan in your mind? Would love to know your thoughts and opinions down below. If you want to know my thoughts, not only on what I previewed from this series in my video from a couple of days ago, but also every single series recap that I've done at this tournament so far. You can check out the playlist up in the iCard right now. That's going to have every single game of MSI covered. Of course, we've also covered all 4 of the major regions, every single game of them all year long on this channel, so definitely have some insight on these teams and how they play, and just generally, I think, how they would match up against each other. But I'm very excited to get into it, so I don't want to waste too much time at the start here. Let's go ahead and talk about the series. If you are new here, what we're going to do is go game by game, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the game and a dud of the game for each individual game, and at the end of the series, I will be giving a player of the series to kind of tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. We will be previewing tomorrow's series as well, the other lower bracket round 2 matchup, which is also pretty interesting on paper, but that section's going to be a little bit shorter. Most of today's video is going to be talking about the series that we got this previous night. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. I'm very excited to cover it. You can already see the 2 teams up on the screen right now. It's a matchup between the number 2 seed from the LPL in Top Esports and the number 1 seed from the LEC in G2 Esports. Really 2 teams that I think have pretty interesting and similar ideologies and playstyles just through different players. Both of them really rely on their top-end talent to be really consistent in the mid-game and actually generate their leads. For Top Esports, it's Jackie Love and it's Mako, at least at this tournament. It's been the bot lane because 369 hasn't been quite as good as he was domestically, and Tian and Cream I think have been generally fine, but they're certainly not superstars and you wouldn't expect them to be the ones carrying the team. Jackie Love has stepped up and been that guy for Top Esports. For G2, it's Caps in the mid lane, and it's Yike to a lesser extent, who has also been very good at this tournament. Broken Blade's been very good at this tournament, so there are, I would say, positives and negatives for both of these teams heading into this matchup in terms of maybe what you're expecting from them. My prediction going into this series was that Top Esports was going to be the better team, and a lot of that opinion just hinges on my thoughts on the bot lane matchup. I think you can talk about how Caps might actually have an advantage over Cream, and that's how I actually labeled it in my primer video before the tournament. I had Caps higher rated than I had Cream coming in here. I think Yike can keep up with Tian. I certainly think if Tian's having a bad day, which is, kind of a coin flip for him, that Yike can, really keep up and enable the rest of the team in a more productive way. And quite frankly, Broken Blade's been better at this tournament than 369, and so, if 369 doesn't turn things around in this series, I could potentially see that being positive for G2, because Broken Blade is the kind of player that steps up when it matters the most. The problem is, I think all of those positives pale in comparison to just where I expect this bot lane matchup to be. Jackie Love and Mako should just blow Hansama and Mickey X out of the water. They've been the weakness for G2 for basically the entirety of the year. Mickey is playing better at this tournament than he was domestically. He was my player of the series in their previous series against PSG Talon, but I'm still a bit concerned about what happens when he has to play against teams that are going to catch him out in some of these more aggressive rotations that he likes to make. When he is getting punished by good teams, he does look significantly worse, and really the big concern is I just do not trust Hansama. I see a lot of people talking on social media like, oh, Hans needs to wake up. Oh, we need to get the good version of Hans. I just don't know if I don't know if the best version of Hans is good enough for a matchup like this. That would be my concern if I'm a G2 fan. Really, when you look at the scouting report of what Hansama is really good at and where he succeeded even before he came to G2 when he was on teams like Rogue, he is a lane-first kind of player. He is a 2v2 kind of player. He is not somebody who is good in team fights. Think of someone like Yan in the current, modern MSI, League of Legends sphere. Yan is a very good 2v2 laner, and it lets him generate enough leads so that he can kind of mask his team fight weaknesses where his positioning can be a little bit more shaky. That's Hansama at his absolute best, is a player that is winning 2v2, is really doing a good job in the early game with things like Kalista and Draven, and doesn't have to be this late game game hyper carry because that's not really the role that he likes to play. The problem with that is if Hans is going to get the best out of himself in a series like this, he has to beat Jackie 11 Mako in lane. He has to win 2v2 early on in games, and I just think that's a really big ask. I think lane swaps are going to be in favor of Top Esports because it allows Jackie to get fed, and if you're trading that for Hans Sama getting fed, that to me is in favor of Top Esports because Jackie Love is just the better team fighter by a large margin. So that's why I think Top Esports should be favored in this series. My prediction was TES 3-1. I think Caps and Yike and Broken Blade are good enough to pull back a game, but I'm just so worried about that bot lane matchup, and I think that that's something that is really exploitable in the current meta. If your bot lane is just straight up better, I think that that is such an advantage in terms of how the current meta ends up operating. But of course, G2 still has options, so I'm excited to see what ends up happening here, but that's just my preview. Let's see what actually happened in the series. Going game by game means we get to start with game number 1, and the winner of game number 1 was G2 Esports. They are going to take the first game of this series. They're going to go up 1-0, and this is a crucial, very critical win because, quite frankly, this was super clean from G2, with the exception of one random fight around Baron that they just completely whiffed and just played really poorly. They played phenomenal in this game. Everybody stepped up. This was all 5 members of G2 really, quite frankly, just outclassing their opponents on the other side, and while that's kind of believable, especially jungle mid, I think that that was very much a possibility for G2 to get advantages in that regard. For bot lane to be as good as they were in this game, like, this is the key to victory. If bot lane can step up and just be okay, if they can just be neutral, if they can just be good enough, that's probably good enough for G2 to win this series. I just didn't think that was going to be a possibility, and they went above and beyond even being neutral in this game. They were positive. They were winning in the bot lane in this game, which is huge. Of course, topside was still very much the carry in this game for G2. You know, we'll talk about kind of the quote-unquote players of the game as we continue to go along. I'm personally going to give it to Caps. I don't know how popular or unpopular this is going to be. He played out of his mind in this game. His individual mechanics, like his micro in some of these fights on Tristana, is just better than anybody else we've seen at this tournament. And quite frankly, I'm willing to make the argument at this point that Caps is a top 5 player in the world. I think that that's very much on the table. Caps is the reason that G2 is like a difference maker in the West. I love Broken Blade and Yike, and I think that they are players that I've really, you know, grown to be positive about a lot, especially Yike on this channel. You know, and Hans and Mickey are fine. They're not like the worst of all time, but I still firmly believe you take Caps off this team and you replace him with like even a good like EU mid laner, someone like a Humanoid who is very, very solid. I don't think that this team is what it is. I think Caps being as good as he is, being one of the best players in the world, that's why G2 can make a difference internationally that these other European and North American teams just can't, because they don't have a player like that in the mid lane. I think a lot of people are going to want to give player of the game though to Mickey X down in the support position. Trust me, I am not trying to take anything away from what Mickey did. I gave him player of the series against that PSG team. You know, when I think broadcast ended up giving it to Caps, trust me, I'm here for Mickey X being a lot more aggressive and actually being super positive in lane. Picked up that kill on Jackie Love early on, and that really, really hurt the Varus. It really shut down his wave timer, and it actually put Hans in a really easy position to be able to come back to lane after they essentially were able to pick up the free kill on Mako and just kind of dominate from there on. So Mickey kind of changing the course of that bot lane, and his team fighting was very good. Maybe the ultimates could have been a bit more, I guess, consistent in terms of how they were able to hit. He just kind of whiffed a couple of them, but outside of that, it was generally fine. And then Broken Blade and Yike were excellent in this game. Broken Blade was dominating by the end of this. Camille is certainly a bold pick into 369, but if you're feeling yourself, and Broken Blade should be, he's had a very good tournament, then pull this out. See if you can beat the Cassante in the mid game and transition that into just being able to blow up Azir and Varus and even the Xin Zhao as we get further and further along. Broken Blade really has been exceptional at this tournament, and I'm really happy to see that. Yike is amazing. LPL teams have absolutely no idea how to deal with Ivern. This is not a new thing. Go back to, I want to say it was last year. I'm sure some LPL historians in the comment section will correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe this was like summer 2023 when Jeje on EDG was just pulling out Ivern constantly when he was playing it regularly, and nobody in the league had any sort of way to deal with it. They didn't really know how to play against it. Like, the LPL has just never been good at playing against Ivern, and Yike is a really good Ivern player, especially when you're enabling Caps, when you're enabling Broken Blade. Like, it just becomes so much easier when you have these super carries that can dive in, that can be more aggressive, and you yourself can play that, like, Janna role coming out of the jungle. I think it's just generally really positive for G2 overall. And I think it really just all came together as like this super complete performance for them. They were unbelievably good in this game. It never was in doubt. They dominated from moment 1 to the 28th minute in the game. This was a dominant performance and a dominant game 1 win. But for Top Esports, you know, you're down, but you're not out. You had your back against the wall even at this tournament already. You were down 0-2 against Gen G, and you almost made the reverse sweep happen. You know, losing game number 1 isn't the worst thing in the world. I think the more concerning part is how they lost game number 1, because they did just kind of get outplayed everywhere. Like, it's just what it was, kind of an everything gap for G2 in this game, which is definitely a bit concerning. Dead of the game was honestly kind of difficult because everybody lost, and everybody lost in ways that they just were not supposed to. I'm going to give it to Tian on the Xin Zhao. He was horrible in this game, got completely out-pressured by Yike, and his team fighting was completely, like, unjustified. He got caught over and over again in the late game. He gave up Baron by getting caught in the upper side of the jungle, and then he gave up Dragon just by standing around and doing nothing. So, really not a good game from Tian, and especially after all the shit that he talked and his general record and his history against G2, you know, being an FPX world champion. Like, you really wanted to see him do better in this particular instance. But it wasn't just him. I mean, bot lane got rolled. Miko, JackeyLove, they just were not good. JackeyLove in particular was targeted over and over again in a lot of these fights. Broken Blade certainly had his eyes on the Varus in a lot of these front-to-back 5v5s. And really, like, how do you stop the Fed Camille at that point? Like, the Varus is just going to die first in a lot of these skirmishes, which is really unfortunate. JackeyLove just was not good enough in lane to be able to transition that low-mobility Varus into the mid-game. Cream was just not nearly as good as Caps. Caps mega outplayed him. And again, that was something we identified as, like, the biggest strength for G2 going into this. Is Caps is probably just better than Cream, mechanically speaking, and I would say that that has become abundantly clear the more this tournament has gone along. Caps really is that dude, and so to see Cream struggle, it's not a huge surprise, especially in a matchup that does require you to play safer and more scaling oriented. By the time you hit the mid game, he was already too out of control for you to ever really be able to duel him. But 369 was okay, still not great. Like, we're still not getting that version of 369 we wanted. Mako really wasn't all that important or all that relevant throughout this game. It just wasn't a good game from Top Esports. All of it was bad, and that means you really have to turn it around. I need to see you win game number 2 again. You've done a good job of coming back and being a team that, you know, plays from behind in a good way, but I don't think you have the ability to, like, I don't think you can afford to do that in this series. I think G2 is too explosive. Any game can get out of control in the early game too quickly for you to be one game away from elimination. So game 2 is a must win. And for G2, if you go up 2-0 on Top Esports, that is such a confidence booster, especially if you're just able to dominate them again, especially if the bot lane is winning. That is a complete mental game changer for this team. So game 2 is super important for both of them, but only one team can take it. Who's it going to be? Well, the winner of game number 2 was G2 Esports. They are going to take game number 2. They're going to go up in this series 2-0, and they are dominating. This was an even more dominating game than game number 1 because you got your hyper carry fed in this one. It wasn't just, oh, gold's going a little bit everywhere around the map. You know, you're winning across the board. There were actually some moments where Top Esports was getting gold back on the top side of the map, where 369 played one of the better games he's had at this tournament up until this point. But none of that mattered. Nothing that happened on the top side of this map mattered because bot lane utterly stomped for G2. And if you were going to tell me that this series was going to go 369 winning in the top lane, Cream getting a solo kill on Caps in lane, and G2 was going to demolish because Hansama was just simply that much stronger than JackeyLove, like, no thanks, man. Like, I wouldn't have believed that for a million years, but here we are. They go back to some of the things that they were introducing a lot in 2023. The Kog'Maw Braum was obviously something that was very common for them, but the double AD comp in particular, something they really relied upon a lot last year. But this time they're executing on it internationally. That was kind of the issue, is last year, and I've had people in my comment section say this, people are like, oh, G2 has played for bot lane. Actually, that was their whole style last year. Yeah, it was their style domestically, where they were able to outplay a lot of these other kind of weak bot lanes, because Mickey was just straight up better than every support, and Hansama was certainly good enough to be like top 1, top 2 in terms of EU. But then when they went and tried that style internationally, it really did not work. They had a lot more success playing through Caps and playing through Yike last year than they did playing through Hansama, even if that was the strategy that they used to win domestically. Getting Draven, getting Kog'Maw, you know, picking Kog'Maw Braum and being able to try to get your hyperscaler ahead. Like, this was something they did a lot domestically. It just was not working at a higher level, and it was a big reason why I think they underperformed so much internationally in 2023. But if you're going to be able to get that version, if you're going to be able to unlock Hans and Mickey and actually allow them to play the way that they did domestically with that kind of confidence and with that ability to play into the mid game, like, it's over. That's G2's sweet spot. If they're able to get that off, they're a top 2 or 3 team in the world. Like, it really is that kind of difference if Hans and Mickey can just win in the bot lane. It is crazy how much that changes the perception of this team. Hans is going to get player of the game, super well deserved. The Kog'Maw got mega fed, and Hans played excellent. His positioning was very good. He got to play really aggro. He knew exactly when to take fights down in the bot lane. Clearly, the communication between him and Mickey X was massive, and Mickey was excellent in lane as well. It is a lot harder to play this lane out as Kog'Maw, especially into something like Draven, if you don't have the Braum. But honestly, Braum shuts down Draven so much, even if it is Jackie loves Draven, that Mickey, you know, having this as one of his signature picks, this was his best champion by a long shot last year, to be able to pull out, and it also being good in your matchup, you being comfortable on it, it's just a really big advantage for G2, and Hans and Mickey really, like, made that worthwhile. I think they weren't the only 2 players to play well. I don't want to just sit here and compliment them and no one else. Yike hit the biggest highlight Rek'Sai play that we've had since the rework, probably, with a 4-man Rek'Sai knockup. It's just ridiculous. Like, that shouldn't theoretically be possible with the way that Rek'Sai, you know, currently plays. But Yike was so freaking good in this game. Again, he's having a phenomenal series. He has just been straight up better than Tian in the jungle matchup, and it's not even really been all that close in the first couple games in terms of early game tempo. You have to give him a lot of credit. You know, Caps and Broken Blade had their moments of good and bad this game. Broken Blade just kind of J-chilling in the top lane. 369 was given a lot of resources by his team because they essentially wanted to split the map, and 369 did get ahead because of it. Broken Blade really didn't get to do a whole ton because of it, but he didn't really need to. You know, the game was out of control by that point. You had your Kog'Maw ahead, and Caps got solo killed by Cream in the mid lane and then said, screw it, I'm just going to be good the rest of the game. And, you know, you can live with that. That's okay. You can survive on that, but for the most part, this was a bot lane victory. Yike was phenomenal here, but Hans and Mickey were the true stars. And then for top esports, now you're down 0-2 to G2 Esports and your bot lane's losing. This is really not good. Like, this is worst case scenario if you're top esports, because now you're going into a must-win game number 3, and, you know, even if you win that, it's a must-win game number 4, and all of that adding on to the fact that even when you were looking at an 0-2 deficit in the Gen G series, what was the lane that was doing well? Well, it was the bot lane, because they had been the best bot lane at the tournament up until that point. But here we are. Jackie Love is getting rolled. Like, this bot lane has not been close. Hans and Mickey have won both games, and they've won by a lot. You know, I'm not going to sit here and say that it's entirely Jackie Love playing horrible, but it's not like he's playing nearly as well as he's played at any point in this tournament or even this year up until this point. He's going to get dead of the game on the Draven, completely useless. No damage, couldn't do anything in the mid to late game, and wasn't even winning lane against the Kog'Maw. Like, this is disaster for top esports, for Jackie Love. Like, this is the worst Draven game you could possibly have played, and that's not good. Mako wasn't any better on the Renata. The bailouts were, I guess, well-timed, if you want to even consider that, but, like, this bot lane got rolled, and they have to win. Like, this is the focal point for top esports. They're the driving force for how TES wants to play the game. If they're losing, TES doesn't have a win condition, or they don't feel like they have a strong win condition. They were the reason I was excited about TES in this series and at this tournament, and now they're just not good enough right now. Cream was also horrible in the late game, even if he did get that solo kill on Caps. It's not entirely surprising. No one in the world can play Corki except for Chovy. I don't really know why anybody else is even trying. A shout out to 369. He did his absolute best. Like I said, one of his better games of the tournament, if we're being entirely honest, was given a lot of resources and was by far the strength of TES. It just didn't really matter, all things considered, and Tian keeps getting out jungled by Yike. And if that's going to happen again, there's just no shot for top esports. If they play even remotely like they have in the first 2 games of this series, this is going to be a very quick 3-0 sweep. But we've seen them down 0-2 before. They were down 0-2 to Gen G, and if they were able to win 2 games in a row against Gen G, they can win 2 games in a row against G2. They just need to get that bot lane online. If they are able to get one good game out of Jackie Love and Mako, I think that could turn the entire series around. But G2 has the potential to do something special here and sweep top esports out of this tournament, which would be massive. If the bot lane can just do it for one more game, if Yike can do it for one more game, then this team is going to be moving on, and that would be a massive victory to get into the top 4 for G2. I think that would be really like a game changer for their perception. So big game number 3, really excited to see what happens, but who's going to win it? Is the series over in a sweep, or is TES going to stay alive? Well, the winner of game number 3 was G2 Esports. They are going to take game number 3. They are going to clean sweep this series, and this is unbelievable for them. This is not only a massive win for G2, this is of course a massive win for the LEC, but even bigger than that, like, this is a defining win for G2. This shows that they really are one of the best teams in the world. Top Esports is not a pushover team. They are not a team that gets outplayed and outdueled lightly. They They have like real world-class elite level talent on this team, and quite frankly, G2 was just better across the board here today. This was not a close series. This was not back and forth. G2 dominated these games. Game 3, probably the closest of all of them, but still a sub-30 victory for G2, which they got in all 3 games. This was a phenomenal series for them, really the best that they have played all year long. I don't even think that's really all that up for debate. Even domestically in the LEC, I don't think that they showed this level of completeness in terms of their game. And I think that's why it's so impressive to me. That's what about this is really standing out to me. It's just the completeness of their performance. It wasn't 1 or 2 players being really good. There were 1 or 2 players that were really good, but there were also, 5 players that were really good on the side of G2. So, like, this is just everything you could have possibly asked for and then some if you're a G2 fan. It's just the dream. It's the dream for how a series like this ends up going down. For Top Esports, this is the end of your MSI run. This is lower bracket. You dropped your 2 lives to Gen G and G2. You needed to be better, and you just straight up weren't. Finishing in 5th, 6th is a disappointment for this Top Esports team. There are no ifs, ands, or buts about it. This is not how they wanted this tournament to end. I think they felt like they had a good matchup coming into this in terms of how these 2 teams went toe-to-toe. It just didn't end up working out. Like, you were not better. You got completely outplayed, and you got to run back to the LPL with your tail tucked between your legs. These players just weren't good enough. Like, I hate to say it. Like, Top Esports as an org kind of has a reputation of historically underperforming internationally, and that has continued here at MSI, which is very much a disappointing thing to see. But, instead of talking about the negatives for TES, let's talk about the positives for G2. Player of the game and player of the series as a whole for me, maybe shockingly, is going to go to Yike. I get it. Like, Hans and Mickey were excellent. And again, if you wanted to give player of the series to Hans or Mickey, I completely agree with you. I think that they were phenomenal. The bot lane being better was kind of the big difference maker, I think, in a lot of people's eyes in this series, but Yike was the best player to me across all 3 of these games. This Ivern game was spectacular. He had like a 48 KDA across this series, something absolutely ridiculous like that. He's just unbelievably good. Like, and it's different styles, right? Like, the Ivern was massive. Watching him, go in and out of being really aggressive on the Ivern while also making sure he can balance the fact that Tristana and Cassante and Nico really need to get a lot of their support and a lot of, backup for a lot of their engages. It's really impressive to watch him juggle that throughout these games. He is a great Ivern player, and it's not like the Rek'Sai in game number 2 was worse, like we talked about. There was that unbelievable 4-man Rek'Sai knockup that essentially won them the game, and so Yike, to me, was the best player on G2 in this series. I think he was the most explosive. I think his gapping of Tion made bot lane's life a lot more difficult. Even if bot lane was already losing 2v2, they didn't have the support of their jungler, which they've had for a majority of this year. And so Yike really being, like, better in the jungle, I think, was a massive turning point in this series. Broken Blade was phenomenal, though, in this series. Quite frankly, just better than 369. Didn't get a lot of support in game number 2. That's really the one where you're looking at and saying, it was just kind of okay. Like, 369 probably better in game number 2. But game 1, really excellent. Game 3 here, the best game that he had all series. The Cassante was a game breaker. We've seen what this champion can do when he is given a good matchup, given a good situation. And he had that in this one, just tank versus tank, and he was way more relevant as the game continued to go on. Caps' Tristana mechanics are legitimately out of this world. We talked about it in game number 1, but nobody buffers CC better than Caps does. He's a top 5 player in the world at the current moment. And like we said, Hans and Mickey being as good as they were might have actually been the difference maker. This game certainly wasn't perfect for them. Mickey with a couple engages that I think weren't very good, quite frankly. I don't think Mickey had a great game number 3. He probably would have gotten player of the series if he had been slightly better here in game number 3, but Hans was really good on the Draven, picking that up from Jackie Love and saying, I beat you on it, now I'm gonna beat you with it. Like, that's ridiculous to do to Jackie Love. To little bro Jackie Love like that as Hansama, like, it's awesome. Like, it's really, really cool to see for G2, just across the board, everything clicking and everything working for a team that now has expectations. Whether you think they had them before this series or not, whether you expected them to win this or not, now they do have expectations. Now they are a top 4 team in the world until proven otherwise, and that's certainly going to be something to continue to monitor, and it's going to be really fun to see. But if they can play like this, if you can get all 5 of these members playing at a world-class level, like, who's to say they can't be a top 2 to top 3 team in the world? And then for Top Esports on the other side, just not good enough. Like, again, there's really nothing else for me to say. There are really not a lot of positives to take away from this series. You got bodied. Like, you got clapped. Like, this was not close. Tian was okay, I guess, in game 3 because he was able to pick up some of those trade kills. He was active in the early game just as he was in game number 2. It just didn't really matter because the lanes that really needed the gold weren't getting them. You were getting gold onto, the Rek'Sai, and you were getting a little bit onto the Kalista, but, Corki was dying, and 369 was useless in this game, and, there's really not a lot you can do in that circumstance. There's not a lot you can come back from there. Cream's gonna get done of the game for game number 3. Those packages were horrible. Again, I think it is such a trap to pick Corki. I'm not saying Cream would have been significantly more relevant on other champions, but, dude, this Corki pick has just been so useless this entire tournament. It was useless towards the end of the playoffs in all the major regions. I just don't understand what teams are prioritizing in it right now. Aurelion Sol was completely unpicked and unbanned in this draft, and, what does Corki do that Aurelion Sol doesn't, in terms of consistency? I just really don't understand. But even then, Azir, even the Akali, if you just want to go comfort, there are just other options to me than the Corki, and I think Cream really suffered because of it. Mako was not good in this series. Jackie Love was not good in this series. We talked about how G2, quite frankly, just outplayed them. That was the turning point, and they're going to go home and feel disappointed by that. They had been the best bot lane at the tournament leading up until this. I don't think you're going to look back at this entire tournament as a disappointment for TES's bot lane, but you're certainly going to say that they underperformed at the part of the tournament that they needed to step up the most in, and that's really not a good sign. Jackie Love with yet another bad MSI performance. This is almost becoming a trend for him at this point, and then 369 was just not good enough at this tournament as a whole. This was maybe one of his better series in terms of individual performances, and that is saying something because he just was not good. He was not good at all across any of this tournament. He was certainly not the best top laner in the world, which we all kind of thought he would be going into this. So really disappointing performance from TES. Usually I try to stay away from negatives on this channel, but this is certainly something that you're going to look at and say, there's no other way to look at this other than that this is disappointing. 5th, 6th is not the outcome you wanted going into this tournament, and maybe if you were competitive in this series, maybe if you showed some fight, I would think even a little bit differently, but not only are you getting 5th, 6th at a tournament where everybody had you top 4, but you got swept. You got swept out of it by a Western team. It's completely disappointing. Top Esports simply had to be better than this, and they weren't. And this is the end of their MSI run, and for G2, they've got to feel very good about that. They've guaranteed themselves a top 4 spot at MSI, which I think generally would have been considered a major accomplishment going into the tournament, but they're not done. Obviously, I'm not saying that it's going to be, possible for them to win the whole tournament. I think that would still be pretty out of reach for me. I still think the top 2 teams at this tournament are just kind of on a league above even TES and T1, but, let's say T1 beats Team Liquid tomorrow, which is kind of the expectation. G2 can beat T1. That is super reasonable to say this team can get top 3 at this tournament, that this team can be the best that of the teams that aren't the 2 best teams in the world right now. I think that as an expectation, totally reasonable and certainly not out of the realm of possibilities. G2 has completely solidified themselves on the international stage, and quite frankly, it couldn't have come at a better time. All right, but that is going to do it for my MSI Day 7 overview and analysis video. Top Esports G2 is done. G2 moving on into the top 4 here, and, again, I've said everything that I need to say about that. That is a massive, massive win for G2, for the LEC, for the West in general. The fact that, we kind of wrote off everybody that wasn't an LCK or an LPL team to see a team in G2 actually be able to go out there and compete and beat Top Esports handily 3-0, sweep them out of the tournament. It's a major positive, all things considered. So congratulations to them, but they're going to be taking on the winner of tomorrow, or I guess tonight's series between T1 and Team Liquid. Already kind of talked about this a bit at the end of game number 3, but if you had to predict, T1 are pretty mega favorites here. It's always fun to see Faker go head-to-head with Impact. 2 former world champion teammates, always good to see that matchup, 2 legends of the game, but, Team Liquid did a great job of getting here. I just don't think they have the firepower to be able to overcome T1, even with T1 underperforming. Now, T1 is also not playing well right now. Faker is completely out of it. I don't really know what's going on with him right now. This is the worst tournament I have ever seen him play. Honestly, this might be the worst stretch of 8 or 9 games that I've ever seen him play. He has just been bad for this team at this tournament so far. He simply has to be better. They won in spite of him against G2. I wouldn't say in spite of him, but both of their losses were Faker getting completely outplayed. So certainly something to keep in mind there. And then obviously he was just non-existent against Billy Gaming. But the bot lane needs to be better. I think they will be. I have the expectation that Guma and Carry are just going to step up and be good into Yon and Core. Yon and Core are the strength of Team Liquid. If they're winning, then oftentimes Team Liquid's in a very comfortable spot, but I just don't know how easy that's going to be against Guma and Carrier, who aren't going to be exploited nearly as much as they were against, like, Elkanon, you know, the game plan where you just, like, dominate early. I think it's possible for Team Liquid to get an advantage there. I just don't think it's likely. And then the mid, like, even the top side of the map where T1 is struggling, like Zeus and Owner, who, you know, I'm very publicly 1 foot in, 1 foot out on both of them. Like, Impact, are they strong enough to be able to compete? We've seen what happens when he goes into Owner. It doesn't look particularly good. Impact into Zeus, I think, could be an interesting matchup if Impact can just survive, but sometimes Impact's mechanics do let him down, even if he is a relatively strong laner, all things considered. So it's going to be interesting. I think T1 are mega favorites going into this, but if TL make it close, I think that's going to be considered an accomplishment for them. My prediction is going to be T1 3-0. I think they should sweep them out of this tournament, but if TL wins a game, I mean, I'm not going to be the most shocked person in the entire world. I would be shocked if TL brings this to like 5 and makes this very, very close. That's more concerning for T1, and that's when you start looking at that G2 series if they do win and going, like, I don't know, do they even win that? Like, can they even beat them? But for now, I think T1 has, you know, a lot to prove, and I think they have a good opportunity to prove it against Team Liquid. But would love to know your thoughts. Do you agree? Do you disagree with me? Let me know down in the comment section below, and let me know about this series as well, about G2's win. Do you agree that this is a huge defining series for G2, or did you know that they had this in them all along? Would love to know your thoughts and opinions down below. Of course, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We post about every single day of MSI on this channel, and we're also going to be covering all 4 of the major regions once again here in the summer split, every single game leading into Worlds as well. So if you're interested in, you know, comprehensive overviews of everything going on in LoL Esports, hit subscribe, hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.